going to start us with this practice. And I appreciate everyone joining us in this important practice. As an organization founded by white people in the settler colonial lineage, BARC is a part of the legacy of land theft and the erasure of Native authority over the lands now referred to as the public lands of Mount Hood National Forest. As an organization, we have established influential relationships with the Forest Service, part of the same federal government which facilitated the violent land theft, colonization, and displacement of indigenous people. Non-native Barkers have access and privilege to this land because of this violent legacy. We're working to transform our organization to take responsibility for this legacy and these unearned privileges. We are learning to practice acknowledgement, respect, and support for the Malalas, Kalapuyans, Chinook and Clackamas, Chinook and Wascos, Northern Paiute peoples, and Sahaptin-speaking peoples who live here and who have always lived here, and the many other Native nations who have always been part of and cared for this land that we now occupy. I now respectfully invite any Native people here today to have a few minutes now to speak freely about this. Now, for all the non-Native people here tonight, I ask you and myself to take the next 2 minutes to write a note to yourself outlining your intentions to continue this practice of acknowledgement. I'd like to ask or invite anyone who would like to share one of their intentions or reflections. If you would like to do that, please unmute yourself and go ahead. And now please join me in one more minute of silence to express our humble gratitude and apology to the original people here tonight across these lands in the past, present, and future. So we're going to do an overview of the Zigzag Integrated Resource Project tonight. And I wanted to start with this slide, which is an overview. This shows the Mud Creek area. This proposal, this project, this timber sale, this integrated resource project is planned in the Zigzag Ranger District, and it has two separate areas. One is the Horseshoe area, which is around Lolo Pass, and then there's the Mud Creek area, which is down here from Trillium Lake south in a teardrop shape. And each of these areas has roughly 1,000 acres proposed for treatment. And so this is an overview from up on a ridge to the west and looking down over a lot, although not all of the project area. So this is a big quarry that's down there around Trillium Lake. Can you see my cursor? Daniela, can you see my cursor? I think you can see my cursor. All right. So, okay, great. So this is a quarry that's down there, and people really like to go use up some ammo in that quarry. And this, so from this point of view, and I took this picture a month ago, you can actually see a lot of the different ages of forest that are present in this. So here's a much younger, more recently logged. This right here, this, I mean, look how complicated and uneven and dense that canopy is. That's a late seral stand. That means it's approaching being old growth. It might be old growth. And I believe that right there is not proposed for any logging. But then here's another younger area that is, and then all of this down here. This is what the forest looks like that is being proposed to have a forest health treatment to make it healthier. And, oh, and then in the far background, we can see, now where my cursor is pointing now, that's in the next drainage. That's on the other side of the Salmon River, and that's not part of this proposal, but that right there is what they're proposing, making a lot of this look like. So here's our literal overview, and in this workshop tonight, I'm going to give an overview of the law that governs our involvement in this proposal. I'm going to whip through some of this on the quicker side because I know for a lot of us, we've been exposed to it a few times before. And then I'm going to get into some details of the project. So NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, is the law that gives the public input. Note that the letter P in NEPA does not stand for protection, it stands for policy. And that's because it's the law that tells how the public can have input. It's not about protection. So what NEPA does that is relevant here is that it requires agencies to undertake an assessment of the environmental effects of their proposed actions prior to making decisions about it. So it means that really the cart's not supposed to lead the horse. And so two major purposes of NEPA are for better informed decision-making and public involvement. And so anytime that an agency wants to undertake a project that's likely to have some kind of environmental effects, they have to do a NEPA analysis. And so the product of that analysis can be a categorical exclusion, a CE, that gets called a lot, a CE, and that assumes that there will be no environmental impact. And so the way that I think a lot of us think of how a CE would be used is like, oh, the ranger station needs a new roof on the bathroom. Go ahead. You don't have to go through a big review process for that. Just put a new roof on your bathroom, it's fine. Interestingly, and this should be another workshop sometime, interestingly, CEs have grown and grown and grown and grown and grown. And now the Forest Service can log up to 3,000 acres under a categorical exclusion if it's to treat insect and disease. So that's a topic for another meeting. And then an environmental assessment is the analysis that has been done to a preliminary degree on this project, which is seeking to determine the degree of impact. So in doing the environmental assessment, the EA, the Forest Service in this case does their analysis to determine, is this going to have an environmental impact? If it is determined that it does, it doesn't mean that they can't do it. They can actually do it. If it's not breaking any other environmental laws, they can still do it. And if the EA results in a finding of a significant impact, then the agency is required to produce an environmental impact statement. So a CE can be 15, 20 pages. An environmental assessment, so this one right now, the main document is about 60 pages long, but then there's all this supporting documentation and it totals up to about 300 pages. And EIS, these are in the thousands of pages because they're actually really thorough. And agencies really, really do everything they can to avoid an environmental impact statement because it's expensive and it takes time, and then they don't get to do their project right away. So where we are now is that the Forest Service has issued a preliminary environmental assessment for this project that they're proposing, which is, oh, my toolbar keeps disappearing, but look at that. Okay, so here's some things that NEPA doesn't do.
Can I ask a question before you go on about the
Please,
slide we just covered?
please, let me go back to it.
Okay, so if we reflect upon the talk from yesterday, there was a serious question raised about the quality of the analysis that the Forest Service does. So right here, in this question, the product of the NEPA analysis can be, when you speak about an environmental assessment and you talk about significance of impact that requires a statement, there are real statistical questions that are raised, as well as definitional questions. So one of the things that we said last night was that the plan really doesn't take into consideration ecological impacts. In other words, the more systemic, broad range effects of the project. And I think if you could offer any sort of perspective on how they go about fulfilling this requirement in terms of some sort of standard scientific approach and methodology, which is acceptable.
Yeah, thank you very much for articulating that, Camila. You articulated that really clearly. And it's really challenging because they are the ones who kind of get to like decide what the degree of impact is going to be. And so we're now kind of at the edge of my understanding of how, of how the degree of impact is scaled or graded, as you will, in NEPA. My understanding is that there's kind of a 5-point scale from no impact all the way up to likely to have a significant impact. And that's EIS, and no impact is CE. And we're in this in-between stage. And so I know you were at the aquatic and riparian workshop, and Ashley was talking with us about the differences of when the analysis from the specialist says that it may impact individuals, but is not likely to impact the population or the long-term survival of the species. So I wish that I had a way to address your question that was like clear and specific, and that's a result of how this law is written, is that it gets convoluted really quickly.
Well, I think a way that it could be answered, and maybe is whether or not there is an academic review of the plan done by scientists who know how to answer these questions.
There's not. So the order of what happens is that the specialists who are trained in their fields, so the botanist is a botanist, and the silviculturalist is a silviculturalist, and the geologist, they're trained in their fields. They do their assessment, and then they write it into their report, and those are the specialist reports. And then the planner, the NEPA planner for this project, then they are actually like the filter between the specialist report and the EA. And so what we can do first is go back and read those specialist reports. And what I have found is where to actually find the science that refers to it is in BARC's scoping comments, because Michael and Brenna spend hours and hours and hours finding the research that has been done, not on this project, but research that has been done on this treatment that they're proposing under these conditions for these purposes, right? So, you know, we have OSU down the street, and OSU is one of the forestry research powerhouses of the world. And so in BARC's scoping comments, there are citations and references to the science that can pinpoint why the effect that they're claiming this treatment will have on these conditions, why we can challenge it. So is that starting to address your line of question, Camilo?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for asking it. Yeah. Okay, so here's what NEPA doesn't do. When we participate and when we submit our comments, NEPA does not decide which alternative to choose. It doesn't prevent environmental impacts from happening. They can and do happen all the time. It doesn't give decision-making power to the public, and it doesn't prohibit any specific actions that are allowed by law. So there are things that are not allowed by law. It's not allowed by law to cut down a tree with a northern spotted owl nest in it during nesting season. That's not allowed. But in broader terms, it doesn't prohibit any actions as long as they're allowed by law. So there's some limitations of NEPA. On to writing public comments. So when we write public comments, it's, as I'm sure you know, it's not like writing a letter to the editor. It's not, you know, it's not a tweet. It's participation in this legal process, and it gives us legal standing on this project, which is sometimes not much, but it is what we have. So our comments, to be substantive, should focus on the purpose and need of the proposed action. And that's the first thing to look at in these proposals is, what is the agency, the Forest Service, saying needs to be done? Why do they think that this project needs to be done? And so that's what we can comment on that. We can comment on whether this needs to be done. They have to propose alternatives, so other ways that they could go about addressing the purpose and need. And as you'll see in this project, the alternative that they considered was do nothing. That was the only alternative they considered. Comments can focus on the quality of the assessment of the environmental impacts. So directly to Camilo's question there. And by finding scientific citations that can give us a different view of the quality of the assessment, that's where we can really target our comments. And then proposed mitigation, so ways that they propose to mitigate it. So if they were to say, well, yeah, this is gonna bring in you know, a lot of invasives, but we're gonna just encourage people to like go out there and, you know, like pick the invasives to use in their herbal medicine. That's not gonna be an effective mitigation. So they have to say, yes, it will have this impact, and here are the steps that we will use to mitigate that impact. And then substantive is the word that we use to talk about comments, basically that can get a reading and that can get a hearing, because they are they focus on the substance. So in a substantive comment, we can provide new information about the proposed action or about an alternative, or about the analysis. We can provide new information. We can say, this study just got published, and it says that the way you analyzed that is wrong. We can provide new information. We can say, I found the unicorn breeding ground, and it's right here, and you're not allowed to log in a unicorn breeding ground. If you find the unicorn breeding ground, they have to drop the entire project. You heard it from me. Substantive comments can present a reasonable alternative or identify a different way to meet the need. Can point out a specific flaw in the analysis, suggest alternative methodologies and the reasons why they should be used, can make factual corrections. Your map shows this road crossing this stream here, but I walked it on the ground, and here's my GPS track, and it crosses the stream at this other place. There's a factual correction. Or identify a different source of credible research. So if it sounds a lot like writing a research paper, it's a lot like writing a research paper. And which doesn't mean it has to be 30 pages long. A 2-page, really specific comment can be really effective. In fact, more effective than a 12-page meandering, I don't think you should ever cut down a tree public comment. Effective comments are clear, really concise, really objective. When we write our first draft, we can put in all of our feelings about it, and then we take all of that out. And we pretend that, you know, scientific objectivity is real. It's strictly related to this project, and it's based on reliable and cited sources. And, you know, so back in January, February, Courtney and Ashley and I were going out into the Mount Hood Zigzag area communities and doing presentations about this project for people in those gateway communities. And, you know, if you live on the Sandy River, you are a reliable source, because you can say, it's in my backyard, and in 2005, this is what happened. So your personal direct evidence is legitimate, is important. Okay, so here's what we've got right now from the Forest Service. This is the preliminary assessment. And this confused me for a couple of years, or when we were talking about, is it a PA or is it an EA? And these terms get used somewhat interchangeably, but this is the preliminary environmental assessment. After these comments are submitted, then the Forest Service gets to read through them and respond to them by modifying their project, or not, decide that they don't have to and they're not gonna. And then they'll release a final environmental assessment. And at that point, after that is released, then anyone who has submitted a comment at this stage has standing to file an objection, which is the next level up in this legal process. And it feels kind of thrilling. It doesn't always result in anything, but I've done it. And it's powerful to be participating in this process. Having our voices heard, even when it doesn't affect the project, there's still power in it. So if you don't remember, who am I sending this letter to? This is, well, actually, you're not sending it to him, but this is who's in charge of this project, Jim Roden. And so it would be really great if all the information about this project were contained in a single document, but it's not. And so I'll show you, and Bark will show you, where to find all the different documents that contain all the different information. And it's like, it's almost as though they didn't really want a lot of public involvement, strangely enough. So this is one of the documents, and this is the one that has this really clear list of what they say they're gonna do. Variable density thinning on 1,872 acres. Variable density thinning means cutting a lot of trees. So that's commercial logging. That part of the project, they would then auction those rights, and a private timber company would bid and then would be assigned the contract, and then they would go and cut down those trees and sell them and get the money for it. Regeneration harvest on 13 acres. Regeneration harvest is a clear cut. And the Forest Service really doesn't like it when we use the word clear cut, because that language was supposed to be retired, which made it really interesting to see in one of the documents, one of the specialists talking about clear cuts. So that's a clear cut, and that's also commercial timber sale. They sell it to a timber company. Sapling thinning on 126 acres. So I'll show you a picture of that. That's taking out smaller, younger, roughly 20 to 30-year-old trees. And so the timber companies that bid on this, then they also have to agree to do some of the stuff that they won't make money on, like doing sapling thinning. That will cost them money, they won't make money. Repairing and maintaining 43 miles of system roads. And the whole thing about roads is exceptionally complicated. But this is part of the project, repairing and maintaining the roads. And these are heavily used areas, and we've driven a lot of those roads, and some of them could really use some repair and maintenance. Decommissioning 2.3 miles of system roads. That means roads that are official Forest Service roads. They have a number, and at some point they were used. They're going to be decommissioned. That means they're going to be either gated or have a trench dug in front of them, or have a bunch of slash thrown on them, or some other way of making it so that people can't use them so easily anymore. It does not mean taking them out of the system. Closing and stormproofing 6.5 miles of system roads. That means putting a gate and culverts where there's either failed culverts or no culverts, but they're still keeping them in the system. Reconstructing and rehabilitating 6.8 miles of non-system existing road alignments. Whew. Okay, let's unpack that. So it's non-system. That means it doesn't have a Forest Service number, and they don't have it as like one of their roads, but it's existing because it was a road once upon a time. It was a logging road once upon a time. And they're the kind of things that we will come upon and be like, oh, there was a road here once upon a time. And after a road is used, unless it gets actually dug up, then it stays a road forever and ever until the end of time, because it gets so compacted. So these are roads that aren't really roads, but they used to be roads, and they're going to be rebuilt as roads, and then rehabilitated. Then they're going to kind of be re-unroaded. And doing all of that creates a lot of erosion into streams. And this is in 2 watersheds that both have listed fish in them. Constructing and rehabilitating 3.9 miles of new temporary roads. Temporary doesn't mean it's going to go away. Once they make a temporary road, it's always a temporary road. It's a permanent temporary road. And then returning 2.5 miles of former system road back to the forest's road system. So from here down to here, They're doing a lot of road work. They're going to be doing a lot of bulldozering above streams with listed fish. Then there's acquiring fish logs to be used in stream restoration projects. That's where they tear a tree out, roots and all, and then stick it upside down in a stream where there's not enough woody debris. And it's kind of cool looking, but I'll show you a picture of what it looks like when they rip them out of the forest. Creating a new top spur trailhead and relocating the top spur trail. That could probably use to be done. Enhancing huckleberry picking opportunities by logging some of the trees. Personally, I don't think that part's a terrible idea, and I'll show you a picture of it. And then pruning to reduce white pine blister rust infections. That's in these same units that have sapling thinning. So that's cutting lower branches off of some western white pine trees. And that's, again, that's work that will, that one of the timber companies will have to do, and it will cost them money. This huckleberry picking, that's a commercial timber sale. They will, the logging company that gets that contract, they will cut those trees and sell those trees. The rest of these are things that will cost money to do. Any questions? Only a million questions. Okay. Okay, so here's the overview again. This is just the Mud Creek area. I've spent a lot of time in Mud Creek. I haven't spent nearly as much time in Horseshoe, but since I'm speaking broadly tonight, it all still applies. Okay, so this is where the Forest Service is telling us why they want to do this. So the proposed action will provide forest products while achieving several other landscape scale objectives. The accomplishment of this objective is measured by volume of timber removed and the acres treated in the matrix for long-term forest productivity. I'll talk about that in a second. But so they're telling us right now that although they're calling this an integrated resource project, the primary goal of this, how they'll know when they've met their objective, is by the volume of timber removed, which is 25 million board feet. So if they take out 25 million board feet, then they'll say, we've done it. We did what we wanted to do. And then the acres treated in the matrix. Treated means logged, and the matrix is like the zoning, the land allocation. So the land that we call Mountain Hood National Forest, every inch of it has a zoning of here's what the Northwest Forest Plan and the Mountain Hood Forest Plan say this land is supposed to do. And matrix is supposed to grow trees so they can get logged. And so long-term forest productivity, it does not mean do all the things that forest does that we value. It means creating conditions for future harvest. It means growing trees for logging. So that's the goal of, what was it, 1,872 acres of this project. Okay, so after tonight, you're gonna get these slides, and then here are all of these tabs, just because we like to give you all of the, the links. We like to give you all the links a million times. And so you can start with Mount Hood National Forest, and good luck finding these projects. You really have to search around. They don't put it front and center, but it's under management. Look for the word management. And then if you find it, then you'll find this project, the Zigzag, and all the project documents. And there's a lot of them. And this one, the project information sheet, is the one that had that like list of everything they're going to do. Now this one is a really interesting one to look at because it has way more detail. This is the project design criteria. And this is where they say in a lot of detail, these are the requirements for building a road and crossing a stream. These are the requirements for how many trees per acre in these types of treatment. This is where they put in a lot of details. And so a lot of people who are participating in these meetings also submitted scoping comments. And I have, this is the first time on a timber sale project that I have commented on that I have seen this much detail in the project design criteria. You know why they put it in there? Because we asked them about it. And because we really asked really specific, substantive comments about how are you going to do what you say you're going to do? I request further information. And so these are the most detailed PDCs that I've seen yet on a timber sale because we made them answer those questions. Go team. Okay, this one is the story map that if you've come to any of these meetings before, you've probably seen Courtney play around on the story map. And from the Forest Service pages, it's hard to find. So I put it here for you. And if you want to geek out on a little GIS, play around with the story map. You can't hurt yourself. And you can really find, like what you can find is you can find the layers that will show you, is this called matrix? Remember, matrix is like the tree farm. And where are the riparian buffers that they are not supposed to be logging in? Where are those? So the story map is really useful. And then
question, just speaking of story maps.
Yeah.
Steve asks, do you know if the units as shown in the story map reflect what the documents state? For example, the wildlife report states that some units were dropped.
Yeah, the story map is current.
And then
the last I checked, the story map is current. Yeah.
And then Steve says the story map was published during the scoping process, so would that have an effect on delay of updates?
During the scoping process, I don't know the answer to that question. That would be one that should an email to Michael or Courtney and they would know for sure. The story map was showing a more updated map than what we received earlier in scoping. So there have been a couple of different iterations of the maps and some stuff has been dropped, but I would defer that question to Michael or to Courtney. And then, were there other questions right now, Daniela?
I think that's all the questions up to this point.
Okay, great. So then here's Bark's Zigzag page, and then Bark's Zigzag comment writing resource page, which is where all of these recordings and all these slideshows are. Okay, so in this preliminary assessment, tells about the public involvement, because that's part of the NEPA process, and it tells us that prior to the official scoping period, 2 public involvement efforts were conducted. And the first was a field trip on October 17th, 2019. And then there was an open house meeting on December 10th, 2019. So they were letting the public know about it in October, December of 2019. And here's a letter from August 2018 from the AFRC, which is the American Forest Resource Council, which is it's a timber industry group. And this letter is to provide a recap of the Mount Hood and timber industry meeting that was held on July 24th. and a subsequent field trip to look at the Zigzag Integrated Stewardship Project in July 2018. Isn't that interesting? And the AFRC, that's the timber industry group, thought the field trip was very beneficial. And we were pleased that the Ranger District is moving forward with this project. The group was also pleased that the forest is going to be treating, logging, a lot of matrix areas and doing a variety of harvest regimes. That means cutting a lot of different amounts of trees, including regeneration, which is clear cutting. Finally, we want to thank the Mount Hood National Forest for ramping up their timber sale program. That was a year before public involvement.
And that was an internal memo, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So look at that. Isn't that interesting? An integrated resource project that first gets cleared with the timber industry. So in this project, the preliminary assessment has to start with the purpose and need. So that's the statement of why it's necessary, what they say needs to be done. And it's, there are a number of different parts of it, of what they say needs to be done. And one thing that they say needs to be done is that they need to improve forest health. There are stands in this project that are overcrowded and relatively uniform. A primary purpose of this project is to improve the health and increase diversity of forested stands. In the matrix land allocation, particularly where it overlaps the C1 timber emphasis, I'm sorry I left that part in there because this is, it's two different land allocations that overlay each other, and they both mean the emphasis is for timber production. So one of the primary purposes of this project is timber production. So here is one that if you went and looked at it, you could say, well, I guess we could call it overcrowded and relatively uniform. They mostly all look roughly the same size. Sure. Okay. But this is in the same unit. Is this overcrowded and relatively uniform? I can see 4 different species of conifers there, different sizes, lots of understory, and that's all in the same unit. That's the unit that's proposed for clear cutting. So they can start over and make it better. All right, another purpose is productivity. And that means producing forest products. And this is where this accomplishment, the accomplishment is measured by volume of timber removed and the acres treated for long-term forest productivity. And this is in that same unit. These are trees. This is, as you can see, a very large, very old Douglas fir and very large, very old Western hemlock. And when we walk through these forests, looking at them with the view that forests have, they have wood and they have a whole lot more besides wood, we're not looking at them as unhealthy, uniform, overcrowded, lacking diversity. That's a pretty nice sized Western red cedar there. Here's a snag, a Western red cedar snag that's been around for a long, long time. And if it gets to stay there, it will continue being around for a long, long time. So I really question whether this forest has health issues. And the botanist questions that too. So in the botany specialist report, You can read what the botanist has to say about it. And I encourage you to do that. If looking at these pictures makes you think, this is an unhealthy forest, then what does a healthy forest look like? Then read the botany specialist report, because he gives us a lot of really, really good information to push back on. And then read the silvicultural, I can't even say that word, silviculture report. And keep in mind that that's the tree specialist, but they are a tree for timber specialist. So read their report and read what they have to say. And I personally find it like a little sickening. And I have a slide further on that shows like the perspective that they're using. Last night's vegetation presentation that Lou did is going to call out some of these forest health issues more specifically. And the slides from that are going to be really useful. And then where do we find the science to push back? Find them in bark scoping comments. And then we can start requesting some alternative actions because the alternative that the Forest Service analyzed was do nothing. And we could do other things besides nothing. Okay, so here's the comparison. This is the comparison of alternatives. The no action, wah, wah. And so here are the stated goals of timber volume, acres of matrix. Treated means make it grow trees bigger faster. And increase forest health and growth means make it grow trees bigger faster. And tree diameter, that means same thing. I won't keep saying it over and over. So now we see this in a lot of their proposals. The no action alternative doesn't account for time and for the passage of time. And so there's no recognition that things change, that the forest changes, it doesn't stand still. But what they do want to show is, oh, look how big the trees are going to be. If we cut down some of the trees, then the trees that are left are going to be bigger so that they can cut them down. And these trees are going to increase diameter and span their crowns, becoming increasingly healthier so they can cut them down.
I want to make a point about that came up yesterday. We were talking about the rationale for the project, and in the variable thinning, there was an area where there was overcrowding and the trees were not growing fast enough. So that was the explanation why it would be healthy to cut them down. So it just struck me that this criterion of trees growing fast enough and not being big enough being used as a reason to cut them down, it seems to me could just as well be a reason to leave them to grow and get bigger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, so like, I think most of us in the world see the word healthier and think one thing about that. And if we know forests at all, we know how complex and full of life they are, and we know what they do. And in Forest Service speak, healthier means that in 50 years, it's 22.6 inches in diameter, and so we can cut it down. Because they are, looking for 40 to 80 year harvest intervals. So it's a really, really good point, Camilo, and it is really, I find it really challenging to, well, I'll let myself get swept up by outrage, and then come back, use that energy to find like, okay, how can I use that to say something substantive? And so this is why my comments, I'm going to be leaning really heavily on the botanist report to push back against what the needs are. So if there are stands that are beginning to function as late successional, then thinning those, logging them, is going to have a really negative impact on everything else living in them. And that gets to have value too. And so where the botanist report was summarized in the PA as unlikely to have an impact, that's not actually what the botanist says. And so that's where we can challenge the PA and say, your specialist report says something different. And so I request an alternative where, here's one of the things I personally am going to be requesting, is that in fire origin stands, there's no variable density thinning. That's just something I'm going to say. So here is where they have their alternative, which is do nothing, and their proposed action. Any other questions before I keep trucking along? Okay, here we go.
Actually, sorry, I do have a question.
Okay.
I noticed the line there where it said that more sunlight to forest floor would increase abundance of plants, including forage species. Do they put pesticide or herbicide on the forest after they cut it? I know they do in some places, but.
No, they can't use herbicide on national forest in their timber areas. They can use herbicide on roads where there's like, after they make a new road and then invasive species come in, they can use herbicide on that, but they can't treat with herbicide. National forest can't do that.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so so can we think of any alternative ways that the purpose and need can be met? What are some ways that, since they can't think of any other way to improve the forest health, we can think of some that are supported in these specialist reports, especially in the fisheries report. If you were in the aquatic and riparian resources training, look in the fisheries report, go to that training's notes, and you can find the references right there. The fire originated stands, those are the stands that that burned around 1902, 1908, and then regenerated from that and haven't been logged since then. Road construction in riparian reserves, whoa, talk about sedimentation in those watersheds with listed fish. So we can start to think of alternatives that we can point to the specialist reports and say, your own specialist doesn't think that's a good idea. So we're going to suggest that you do something differently. And this is why. Anything else that anybody is like having come to mind right now as alternatives to request? Okay, I know, because I'm like overwhelming you with information and you all are really like awesome listeners.
Well, one question that I have is about the regeneration area.
Yeah.
Is there something in the maps that can help us identify where it's sited and examine what its relationship, for example, to rivers and streams and other sensitive areas might be?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is, it's Unit 129, and it's in the story map. You know what, in the presentation last night, Lou had a map that showed the different units in different colors. There's just one that's being proposed for this clear-cut regeneration harvest. And there's just one, and it's in that one slide. And so that's the easiest place that I can think of to send you to look for it. Will that work?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so there are other needs that they're proposing, and
Wave.
hi.
Hi, Mia.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hello. So one question has to do with it being required to look at issues of climate change, and talking about the Northwest forests being particularly adept at storing carbon. So I don't know if there's a way, when you ask anything else, is there a particular way to raise that as an issue?
Yes, so I'm glad you asked that. And there's going to be a whole entire training next Tuesday with Brenna Bell, the staff attorney, about climate and carbon. And I have a slide about that at the end of this presentation. And so the thing to know about it is that the forest plan contains 0 direction about carbon, none, nothing. And so on every single project, they copy paste the exact same page that's just awful. And it says, oh, the forest plan doesn't have any direction about carbon. And so this forest is just a drop in the bucket. And they do that every single time.
And when you say the forest plan, do you mean the Northwest Forest Plan?
Both the Northwest Forest Plan and the Mount Hood Forest Plan. So as you know, the Northwest Forest Plan is regional, and then the Mount Hood Forest Plan is specific to Mount Hood National Forest, and they're equivalent, but the Northwest Forest Plan is it's like a higher order, and so neither one contains any direction on carbon and climate, which in some ways it makes it all the more crucial for us to really push onto it, because we're going to be putting it in the record that they stalled and stalled and denied and denied and stalled and denied and stalled. And eventually we'll tip it over. So we have to keep pushing. And Brenna is going to give strategies for best ways to do that. So thank you for bringing that up, Kathleen.
Thank you.
So I'm going to sort of, oh yeah.
Another question in the chat. Steve asks, they don't replant logged areas, do they? Do they leave reforestation to natural processes?
So in this project, the one unit that is going to be clear cut, they are going to replant. They're going to overplant it and then come back and thin it. And but the other areas they're thinning now, so they're going to take some trees out now so they can come back later and take some more trees out. And in that scenario, that's variable density thinning, then that's naturally regenerating. So they go in and they take out some trees, and then next time they're going to take out these ones, but those ones are growing. So it's only the regeneration harvest unit that in this proposal will be replanted. So I'm going to kind of pivot away from the vegetation actions now to just to do an overview, because I'm trying to do overview of some of the other aspects of what is being proposed in this proposal. Transportation system management. That's a bunch of stuff about roads. And in that in that early slide with the bullet points of all the things they want to do, that's where all of these different road things that they're proposing are in. And if this is one that you really want to focus on, I really suggest looking at BARC's scoping comments for information about roads. And if if you're kind of like a planning nerd, this might be good for you. I find it really challenging to figure out their language about transportation system, but there's some issues that relate to the logging. And so here's their breakdown of provide access for vegetation management. That means build new logging roads. And then these are in the two different sections, Mud Creek and Horseshoe. Construct new temporary roads, this many miles, this many miles. This one, which I'm not even going to try to read out loud, but this many, and then this one, this many. So all of this is building, it's building new logging roads. It all adds up to that, and it adds up to about 10 miles of new logging roads in watersheds with listed fish. Okay, another point, another purpose is to enhance the aquatic and riparian habitat. And this one is so hard to wrap my head around because a riparian area should have large trees that periodically fall into streams. Okay, but due to past fires and management practices, large trees are lacking. So because they logged it before, there's not enough large trees. And so they're proposing to put some large trees in there by taking them out other places and then putting them in to these riparian areas. But then in the upland areas of these riparian reserves, they're going to do some commercial logging and take some trees out, which is the exact past management practice that created the situation on the ground today. So this is a proposal to manage their way out of a situation created by management. And I will refer you again to the aquatic riparian presentation from the other night, if this is one that you want to focus on. Because that riparian area, when I was there, it didn't really look to me like it was lacking in large woody debris in the least. And one of the residents that I crossed paths with, they were just crossing the road on their way to work, and they really didn't feel like they needed any logging in their home. Oh, it was like the best way to start my day. This sweet little black bear just trucking across the road. But it was a road in a riparian area. And what could possibly go wrong with that, with putting a road in a riparian area? And so this is actually like, on the maps, this road doesn't exist because to the right is a private inholding of land held by Crown Zellerbach. And then on the left is Forest Service. And it appears that Crown Zellerbach just drives their bulldozer here, and they've up the road, it goes up basically to the bottom of Trillium Lake, and they've got a bunch of infrastructure in there. And so this is proposed as a new temporary road. And you can't see from the resolution in these photos, but like there's willows growing here, and there's little irises, and there's like rushes, and like the wetland, the stream considers this part of itself. This is part of the stream. There's flowing water in this ditch. So, hey, what could possibly go wrong with putting a road in there? And so if this is something that you feel moved to push back on, reading the fisheries report and the botany report again, he really hits hard. And then going to Bark scoping comments is where you can zero in on ways to push back. And we can for sure do some really strong pushing back on their doing any logging in riparian reserves. And then they talk about other opportunities, other stuff they want to do. So the Top Spur Trail, and it's true, the Top Spur Trail is really heavily used and there's not good parking, and they want to make a new alignment for this trail, and that's fine, but they want to put it on a proposed log landing. So it's so convenient that there's going to be a log landing there anyway. And a couple of barkers have gone out there, and where that proposed log landing looks like it would be is just as sensitive as where the trailhead is now. They are also going to acquire fish logs for use off-site. That's sticking them in a stream, and I'll show you a picture of what that looks like. And then fuel treatments. So inside many of the vegetation management actions, fuel treatments will occur. And what that means is that's how they talk about how they're going to deal with the slash that they create. And if you want to read about that, it's in the PDCs, the project design criteria. And then another project, or another part of this project, is to enhance huckleberry productivity. So this is some more, it is some more commercial logging. If you want to go up there and see what it looks like, you will need a high clearance vehicle. That road is crazy, but beautiful. It's really beautiful. And then this part we've referred to, that they're also going to do some pruning of some western white pine trees. And so I'm getting toward the end of my slides now, and we'll have time for some more general or specific questions. So here's what it looks like when they rip the fish logs out. And this is from, there was like a different fish log project that's ongoing. And so when we were out there ground truthing, they were in the process of doing it. And they actually wouldn't need to do it if they would stop logging in riparian reserves, because then the trees would die and fall over all by themselves. Okay, so this is where I don't think this part of the project is a terrible idea, and people with more knowledge and experience and expertise than me may see it differently, and I would love to hear from them about that. But this is an area that's adjacent to one of these huckleberry treatment units that was treated before, and I'm actually going to go there next month to pick some huckleberries. And they left the largest trees, and they left a fair amount of snags, and the road up there is pretty terrible. And I mean, that makes there be less traffic on it, and that's a plus. But this is another part of the proposal. And then this is the area of young forest that they call plantation, but I don't like to call things plantation at all. And so this is some young forest where they're proposing to take out some of the trees. And then here's, oh no, that's a lodgepole. There's western white pines in here. There's a western white pine that they're gonna lop off some of the lower branches to slow down the spread of blister rust. And so this is a non-commercial treatment. It doesn't mean that it's without impact, but it's not a commercial timber sale yet. And then I just have some special love for snags. I really love snags. Snags are standing dead trees, and standing dead trees can stand for a really, really, really long time. And critters in the forest love snags. Anything that lives in a tree loves snags. Bugs love snags. Anything that eats bugs loves snags. I love snags because they're beautiful. And a lot of these units that are proposed for variable density thinning, heavy thinning, have some really good snags in them, really good snags. And I'm going to show you some pictures of some really sweetheart snags. So in the PDCs, the project design criteria, they both talk about the protections that they will give to snags, because like everybody knows that snags are important. So they'll be retained in all units where safety permits. But it means that if the contractor says, oh, these snags aren't safe for my fellers, we got to take them down, then they'll be taking down the snags. So they can include them in skips, and skips are little areas that within a logging unit, they're going to not log this little area right here, and that's a skip. And so they can draw the skip around some of the really good snags. But the skip can only be 5% of the whole unit. And there's other stuff that gets a higher priority for getting placed in a skip, like any wet seeps or wet areas, or survey and manage plants. That's plants or animals that have a certain degree of protection status. And so skips only have a moderate priority for features such as snags, legacy trees, and they're only giving skips a priority for these things in units under age 80. In units over age 80, then snags and legacy trees don't have a priority for skips. And if there are going to be any late serial characteristics retained at all in a unit that's already 108 years old, if they're not protecting the snags and they're not protecting the legacy trees, then they're really not protecting any of the late serial characteristics. And now I'm going to show you some really sweetheart snags that I just fell in love with. Check that out. Oh, we could have a party in there. These are both cedar snags. Oh, so that's the burn, and that burn was around 1902. So that snag has been hanging in there for 118 years. Not bad for an old tree. Oh, look at all the woodpecker action. And this one, you can see, I was like trying to write on it. This is a 35-inch diameter snag that is one of the tallest snags I've ever seen. It's like, that's like an 80-foot tall snag. So, although the name is really friendly sounding, Integrated Resource Project, it's a timber sale and it's a timber management project. And when the purpose and need says that the purpose of the project is to improve the health and increase the diversity of the forested stands, a careful reading shows us that improving the health really refers to accelerating tree growth for future harvest. And that then when we carefully read the specialist reports, it shows us that this project will have a negative impact on diversity, both of species and forest structure. And the way that they say that this project will increase diversity is by pretending that time doesn't pass in a forest and that the conditions that they see now, it's just gonna get worse. It's not gonna change, nothing's gonna change, and we're gonna make it change and make it better when we know that time passes and time changes things. So what about carbon and climate? It seems like the elephant in the room that I haven't talked about. Right, it is. So logging is Oregon's largest contributor to atmospheric CO2, bigger than anything else. And they have no direction on how to address it. And so we need to hold their feet to the fire, like the fire in the sky, right? The fire that we are creating, that logging is creating by CO2. So we need to give them some really strong pushback on that. And I'm going to be at Brenna's workshop on how to best do that, because I keep pushing back and they keep blowing it off. And we will eventually, we'll tip them over altogether eventually. So if you're feeling overwhelmed right now, that's okay. That's totally appropriate. That means that you've like been trying to take in a lot. And I'm a little overwhelmed, so we're all in good company. Take it in and let your brain rest for a day. If you're not feeling overwhelmed, it might be because this is your fourth or fifth one of these, and you've had time to integrate it and to read through some of the documents. So let your brain rest for a day. Maybe like write yourself some notes when we're done, but then just take a break and then come back and read through some of the documents and see what you start to feel drawn to, because something in here has gotten its claws into you. And so let yourself feel what that is and then start to read through it, and then pick, just like you can pick one thing and build your argument around that. And I so appreciate the care and energy that you've already given this issue by being here when you could be like sitting in your backyard with a cold drink, and just being like, Smokey Bear, yay. So thank you for what you've given this already. And if you're overwhelmed, that's okay. It means you're paying attention, and you will use that in a very productive way. So comments are due August 10th, which is right around the corner. And here's what we do with them. You'll write it. This is a legal action, so make it formal, make it serious. Make it like the dissertation that maybe you didn't write, or maybe you did. That would be great. And then put it in a PDF so that nobody can like change your words on you. Put it in a PDF. You email it here to this. And then in a separate email, send a copy of it to Michael at BARC. We kind of prefer people to not like send it here and CC BARC, because it's important, like they know that BARC has a lot of supporters, and it's also important for them to see that like each of us, we're not just like little BARC talking heads. We are our own people with our own concerns and our own issues, and that this isn't just a like click here to take action, right? This is much more substantial than that. And we have we have an entire 1 minute for questions, but I can stick around. But I want to give special thanks to BARC's Associate Director, Courtney Ray, who is awesome and who has pushed me as a volunteer to do way, way more than I thought that I had capacity to do. I want to especially thank BARC's Forest Watch Coordinator, Michael Krokta, who is like a walking internet of forest knowledge. He's amazing. And we have this great volunteer who's a NEPA specialist, Ashley Bromberg, who has totally upped our game on understanding NEPA. I want to thank Daniela, who's our co-host here tonight. And I want to thank the Native people of the region that we now call the Pacific Northwest, who have always cared for this land and who are still here.